By the following summer, Mom and Dad were heading into their third year on the streets. They'd figured out how to make it work for them, and I gradually came around to accepting the notion that whether I liked it or not, this was how it was going to be. It's sort of the city's fault, Mom told me. They make it too easy to be homeless. If it was really unbearable, we'd do something different. In August, Dad called to go over my course selection for the fall semester. He also wanted to discuss some of the books on the reading list. Since he'd come to New York, he'd been borrowing my assigned books from the public library. He read every single one, he said, so he could answer any questions I might have. Mom said it was his way of getting a college education along with me. When he asked me what courses I had signed up for, I said, I'm thinking of dropping out. The heck you are, Dad said. I told him that while most of my tuition was covered by grants and loans and scholarships, the school expected me to contribute $2,000 a year. But over the summer, I had been able to save only $1,000. I needed another $1,000 and had no way to come up with it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Dad asked. Dad called a week later and told me to meet him at Lori's. When he arrived with Mom, he was carrying a large plastic garbage bag and had a small brown paper bag tucked under his arm. I assumed it was a bottle of booze, but then he opened the paper bag and turned it upside down. Hundreds of dollar bills, ones, fives, tens, 20s, all wrinkled and worn, spilled into my lap. There's $950, Dad said. He opened the plastic bag and a fur coat tumbled out. There's mink. You should be able to pawn it for $50, at least. I stared at the loot. Where did you get all of this? I finally asked. New York City is full of poker players who wouldn't know their butt from a hole in the ground. Dad, I said, you guys need this money more than I do. It's yours, Dad said. Since when is it wrong for a father to take care of his little girl? But I can't. I looked at Mom. She sat down next to me and patted my leg. I've always believed in the value of a good education, she said. So, when I enrolled for my final year at Barnard, I paid what I owed on my tuition with Dad's wadded, crumpled bills. That is an excerpt from The Glass Castle by Jeannette Walls, the book that I read this week. And this book, the story is just insane. This girl, Jeannette, this is a memoir of her life with her family moving around the country, and it is one of the most insane family stories I've ever heard. I had no clue what I was getting myself into with this book. ChatGPT recommended it based off of autobiographies, memoirs that I was looking for. And it was an absolute incredible experience to read and absolutely terrible at the same time. The kids in this family have atrocious parents. There are a few redeeming moments, kind of like the one that we just read, but the vast majority of it's atrocious, and we'll get more into that later. And we're going to learn a lot as far as habits go of what not to do from the parents and a lot of what to do from the kids. One of the first highlights that I made in this book is just on page 10. Jeannette is the author. She's 3 years old in this story. It's her first memory, and she's cooking hot dogs by herself outside in her yard. And her dress catches on fire at 3. And she's just screaming to be helped. And her mom comes and gets her, and they go and ask their neighbor for a ride to the hospital. They go to the hospital. And we learn just the kind of character that Jeannette is just right off the bat. She is quite literally built different. She says, and so when she's at the hospital, she's cracking jokes with all the nurses. And it says this. It said, the doctor said I was lucky to be alive. They took patches of skin from my upper thigh and put them over the most badly burned parts of my stomach, ribs, and chest. They said it was called a skin graft. When they were finished, they wrapped my entire right side in bandages. Imagine a 3-year-old having to go through this. Like, that would be terrifying on so many different levels. And this is what she said. She says, "Look, I'm a half mummy," I said to one of the nurses. She smiled and put my right arm in a sling and attached it to the headboard so I couldn't move it. Like, all of these, throughout this book, these examples of Jeannette's life, like, the resilience level that she shows is just absolutely incredible and something I strive to emulate. On page 15, this girl is hardly afraid of anything. She gets back from the hospital. They actually check her out of the hospital, meaning that they just kind of stole her from her bed and ran out. And it just says a couple pages later, "A few days after Mom and Dad brought me home, I cooked myself some hot dogs. I was hungry. Mom was at work on a painting, and no one else was there to fix them for me." So she got right back in the saddle. Like, that resilience there that we see, even as a child, like as a 3-year-old, is absolutely incredible. She just goes right back to playing with fire. The next highlight I got here is something that we see throughout this book. The parents have a lot of good ideas and maybe philosophies and stuff of how life should be lived and what should be done, but they take them way too far to the extreme in most cases with their children, and causes this kind of really terrible upbringing environment that Jeannette had to overcome. It just says, "Mom always said people worried too much about their children. Suffering when you're young is good for you," she said. "It immunized your body and your soul, and that was why she ignored us kids when we cried. Fussing over children who cry only encourages them," she told us. "That's positive reinforcement for negative behavior." I've heard differing science on this personally, as far as whether you should ignore kids when you cry or not. I think the principle of not coddling your kids too much is important, but you'll see throughout this book, like, this mom, she just uses good principles as an excuse, as a cover-up for absolutely lazy and selfish behavior. It's not even funny. It's really not. Yeah, the mom is terrible. And so we definitely learn what to avoid from that. Just like you'll see examples of that throughout the book where she takes it way too far to the extreme. Here we go. So page 30, so they move around a lot when she's younger. They do this thing in the book, they call it the skedaddle, where as soon as things catch up to them or bills can't be paid or something, they'll just pile everything in their car and leave and go find a new town and just run away from wherever they were before. And there's one of these times where they're doing that, and she falls out of the car while they're like driving. I'll just read it for you here. There's so many things in this book where it's like, this could have taken her out of the game, this could have taken her out of the game, this could have severely impaired her, and she just is so resilient and doesn't let any of that stop her. It's really incredible. So they're driving out in the desert. She says, "Just then we took a sharp turn over some railroad tracks. The door flew open, and I tumbled out of the car. I rolled several yards along the embankment, and when I came to a stop, I was too shocked to cry, with my breath knocked out and grit and pebbles in my eyes and mouth." So this girl is still 3 or 4, and she's just fallen out of a moving car. "I lifted my head in time to watch the green caboose," that's what they named their van, "get smaller and smaller and then disappear around a bend. Blood was running down my forehead and flowing out of my nose. My knees and elbows were scraped raw and covered with sand. I was still holding the Mounds bar, but I had smashed it during the fall, tearing the wrapper and squeezing out the white coconut filling, which was also covered with grit. And then she just sits there for a long time, at least. It just says, once I got my breath back, I've got a note here. It just says that this is a terrible thought for any child to have, like, genuinely. Like, I think we all have it maybe once or twice on accident, but, like, having this as a genuine thought is just terrible. She says, once I got my breath back, I crawled along the railroad embankment to the road and sat down to wait for Mom and Dad to come back. My whole body felt sore. The sun was small and white and broiling hot. A wind had come up, and it was rolling the dust along the roadside. I waited for what seemed like a long time before I decided it was possible Mom and Dad might not come back for me. It's so terrible. They might not notice I was missing. They might decide that it wasn't worth the drive back to retrieve me. That, like, I'm going to butcher this, but like Don, I think it's Quixote. They named one of their cats Quixote. I was a bother and a burden they could do without. This story just a couple pages before where she's getting this from, they're doing the skedaddle, so they're running from this town, and they've got a cat in the car, and the cat doesn't like being in the car and is like meowing or putting up some fuss, and the dad just grabs the cat by the scruff and throws it out the window as they are driving, and just like gone, like just total abandonment. And it's wild. Like, what a terrible lesson to teach your kids is, like, living things are dead weight, basically. So yeah, it's messed up. The parents do something similar like that again. They rescue a lot of cats to keep them company, and it says that one day they had too many cats. In fact, we had rescued lots of cats since we tossed Quixote, again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, out the window, and most of them had gone and had kittens, and it got to the point where we had to get rid of some of them. This is so terrible. We didn't have many neighbors to give them to, so Dad put them in a burlap sack and drove to a pond made by the mining company to cool equipment. I watched him load the back of the car with bobbing, mewing bags. It doesn't seem right, I told Mom. We rescued them, now we're going to kill them. And this is what Mom said. She is just wild. We gave them a little extra time on the planet, Mom said. They should be grateful for that. It's just unbelievable, the kind of things that these parents say to their kids, and it's absolutely incredible how well the kids turned out despite this type of upbringing. It's a miracle. It's amazing. The parents do have some redeeming moments. It doesn't really make up for all of the craziness that they put their kids through, but there are some things that are better than others. So there's they're living in California this time in Midland, and there are some Joshua trees around, and Mom teaches Jeannette this. I think this is a good lesson. Jeannette just says, one time I saw a tiny Joshua tree sapling growing not too far from the old tree. I wanted to dig it up and replant it near our house. I told Mom that I would protect it from the wind and water it every day so that it could grow nice and tall and straight. They had passed a fully grown Joshua tree before and talked about how crooked and kind of messed up looking it looked. And so Jeanette's now trying to correct that messed up looking tree effect by hiding it with the house. Mom frowned at me. "You'd be destroying what makes it special," she said. "It's the Joshua tree's struggle that gives it its beauty." And I think this proves prophetic on a lot of counts throughout the rest of the book. Part of what makes Jeannette's life, this book, and frankly all of our lives so special is our struggles that shape us into who we are. And what Jeannette does that is really, frankly, quite heroic is she really emphasizes resilience and just being responsible and using agency in her choices and just being really resourceful with what was given to her in order to make the best of what she has, which, as you'll continue to see, is definitely not a lot. So just, I mean, it's incredible what this girl and her siblings have to go through. And the fact that they all, for the most part, turn out pretty good is just wild. So there's definitely a ton to learn from her outlook on life and everything. Here's another bit of redemption. So their dad is totally a deadbeat dad. Like, he's the town drunk in a lot of places, can't really hold a job, always has got some type of scheme going on, comes in drunk and will wreck stuff up. But there's one story here towards the beginning of their lives again that I want to point out. Just says, "Dad lost his job at the gypsum mine after getting in an argument with the foreman, and when Christmas came that year, we had no money at all. On Christmas Eve, Dad took each of us kids out into the desert night one by one. I had a blanket wrapped around me, and when it was my turn, I offered to share it with Dad, but he said no thanks. The cold never bothered him. I was 5 that year, and I sat next to Dad, and we looked up at the sky. Dad loved to talk about the stars. He explained to us how they rotated through the night sky as the earth turned. He taught us to identify the constellations and how to navigate by the North Star. Those shining stars, he liked to point out, were one of the special treats for people like us who lived out in the wilderness." I think this is really smart. A really smart perspective to share with your kids if you don't have a lot, or to maintain yourself. Like, if you don't have a lot, try to find the good everywhere in what you do have. So it says, those shining stars, he'd like to point out, were one of the special treats for people like us who lived out in the wilderness. Rich city folks, he'd say, lived in fancy apartments, but their air was so polluted they couldn't even see the stars. We'd have to be out of our minds to want to trade places with any of them. And then he goes through and he, like, his Christmas present to them is he lets them pick their favorite star, which obviously that only works to a certain extent, but for little kids, like, I think that's super cool. His logic is fair. He said, Jeannette says, "You can't give me a star. No one owns the stars." And Dad says, "That's right, no one else owns them. You just have to claim it. You just have to claim it before anyone else does. Like that fellow Columbus claimed America for Queen Isabella. Claiming a star as your own has every bit as much logic to it." And that's valid. That doesn't justify them not having any money because Dad can't keep a job because he's always constantly fighting with people. But it is a good way to use your resources well and stay resilient with things. Here's another crazy story, just about how wild this is. So, Mom gets pregnant again. They've got 3 kids. Lori is the oldest. Jeannette is the middle child, and then Brian is the youngest. And then Mom's pregnant and is about to have another kid. And so they're they're going to go to the hospital because she just says earlier that day, mom had told us that the baby had decided it was big enough to come out soon and join the family. So she hasn't been tracking her pregnancy at all, probably because she thought that was boring. But she just decided, hey, we're going to go closer to the hospital, so because I'm going to have this kid soon. Like, wild. But so she's pretty pregnant, like at least 10 months pregnant. And when they're headed into the hospital, mom and dad start fighting about how pregnant, like how long the mom has been pregnant for. And oh my gosh, this story is literally insane. Talk about terrible lessons to teach your kids. So they're fighting and they're calling each other names and stuff. And dad says some blasphemy. So mom gets upset, reached over. It says, mom got upset at dad's blasphemy, reached her foot over to the driver's side, and stomped on the brake. It was the middle of the night, and mom bolted out of the car and ran into the darkness. They're in the middle of the desert, like the middle of nowhere. They're going towards Blythe, California, leaving Midland, which if you know where either of those places are, I've actually driven through Blythe once, and there's Blythe itself is not anywhere close to a city. I would say it's a small town. And I think it's grown a decent amount over the last decade or so, but back then, this would be kind of in like the 1970s or so. There's nothing there. Like, she's literally crazy. She's just running. This pregnant lady is just getting out of the car because she's mad in the middle of the night and just running into the desert. And dad starts cussing at her, saying, get back in the car. And she says, you make me, Mr. Tough Guy. And she screamed as she ran away. And so this is what dad does. He doesn't get out of the car and go chase after his wife. He jerks the steering wheel to one side, drives off the road into the desert after her. And that says, Lori, Brian, and I braced one another with our arms like we always did when Dad went on some wild chase that we knew would get bumpy. So this is something that he frequently does, is he just drives his car into the desert randomly. Like, talk about a total disregard for taking care of your stuff. He's driving towards mom, trying to find her, just calling her names, ordering her to get back in the car. Mom refused. She was ahead of us, bobbing in and out of the desert brush. Since she never used curse words, she was calling Dad names like blankety blank and worthless drunk so-and-so. Dad stopped the car, then jammed down the accelerator and popped the clutch. We shot forward toward Mom, who screamed and jumped out of the way. Dad turned around and went for her again. He's literally trying to hit his own pregnant wife with the car. Like, what a terrible lesson to teach your kids about how to treat their wife. It was a moonless night, so we couldn't see Mom except when she ran into the beam of the headlights. She kept looking over her shoulder, her eyes wide like a hunted animal's. What the heck? We kids cried and begged Dad to stop, but he ignored us. I was even more worried about the baby inside Mom's swollen belly than I was about her. The car bounced on holes and rocks, brush scratching against its sides, and dust coming through the open windows. Finally, Dad cornered Mom against some rocks. I was afraid he might smush her with the car, but instead he got out and dragged her back, legs flailing, and threw her into the car. We banged back through the desert and onto the road. Everyone was quiet except Mom, who was sobbing that she really did carry Lori for 14 months, which is what they were arguing about, was how long she had been pregnant before. And like, just absolutely insane, the type of people these parents are and the habits that they're instilling through their example on their kids. It's an absolute miracle that Jeannette and Lori and Brian made it out like they did. So we're going to jump ahead. They move to Blythe. She has the baby. And they're back in school. And Jeannette, like, gets in fights. And this is something that just emphasizes her resilience. There's some Mexican girls that fall. It says she gets jumped. It says they beat me up pretty bad, pulling my hair and tearing my clothes and calling me teacher's pet and a matchstick because she's pretty tall and skinny. I came home that night with scraped knees and elbows and a busted lip. Looks to me like you got in a fight, Dad said. He was sitting at the table, taking apart an old alarm clock with Brian. Just a little dust up, I said. That was the word Dad always used after he'd been in a fight. They're beating her up pretty bad. She's a first grader. Pulling her hair, tearing her clothes, calling her names. They split her lip. And this is what she says to her dad. Just a little dust up. And then she lies and says that there's 6 kids to make it seem like she's cooler. There was only 4 girls who beat her up. And Dad asks her, is that split lip okay? She just says, this little old scratch. As a first grader, you should have seen what I did to them. And just like totally like brushes it off. Like as a first grader, that's absolutely incredible. And just like a really tough mentality, really resilient mentality for people to develop. I'm not advocating for bullying or beating people up or anything like that. I think that's terrible, but life can be tough sometimes, and I think that's a really, like, that type of resilience is a really good way to handle it. Skip ahead here to another example. I think there's a lot of things in this book that the credit goes towards the kids and their resourcefulness rather than the parents and the circumstances that the parents put the kids in. They move again. This time they're living in where is it? Somewhere Battle Mountain, which I think is either in Nevada or Colorado. I think Nevada. And they live there for a while. And they're dirt poor, right? They're dirt poor for the vast majority of their lives. And we'll get a little bit more into that later and how pride plays a part in the fact that they are poor. But it just says, instead of beds, we kids each slept in a big cardboard box. So first off, that's crazy. They're just like their beds are cardboard boxes, like the ones refrigerators get delivered in. A little while after we'd moved into the depot, we heard Mom and Dad talking about buying us kids real beds, and we said they shouldn't do it. We liked our boxes. They made going to bed seem like an adventure. Like, kids are incredibly resilient. And I think if we can figure out how to harness that, obviously, and not nearly as an extreme way as these parents are, but kind of walk that line between teaching them how to function on their own and utilizing the resilience and the freedom and the independence that the kids are naturally predisposed to have, while teaching them as best we can, like they'll turn out really, really able to do a lot of cool things. I think we shortchange what kids can do pretty often. In this book, obviously, again, the parents take it way to an extreme and just essentially abandon them and leave them to fend for themselves in a lot of ways that they shouldn't, or inflict additional pain on the kids' lives where they totally shouldn't. But the habit of resilience and that attitude is absolutely critical for just becoming great in life, and you can see that sticks with Jeannette throughout the rest of her life, and it's awesome, as well as the other kids. Another habit that these kids have is they are really resourceful in a lot of different ways, and that resourcefulness lends itself to creativity as well. There's a podcast that I listen to called the Founders Podcast by David Senra. Absolutely phenomenal. I love just about every episode that he's put out. And he studies ultra successful entrepreneurs, and you see this trait in a ton of the entrepreneurs that he has studied, is that they are relentlessly resourceful. And that translates, I think, in my head, resourcefulness and creativity go pretty hand in hand. And this story just kind of emphasizes that resourcefulness, that creativity that Jeannette has when she's a kid, and you see it show up again and again and again throughout her life to great positive effect later on in her career, and just being able to get her out of the crappy family situation she's in. It just says, when Dad wasn't there, we invented our own games. Like, that in and of itself is powerful. Just like they don't depend on someone else to create a fun life experience for them. They just go out and do it themselves. They take ownership over their time and the amount of fun that they're having with their time, and don't just like pass that blame that they're not having fun off to someone else. They shoulder it themselves and go and invent their own games. I think that's super, super powerful. I also think it goes to prove the point that kids probably don't really need that many toys. One of the other habits that mom and dad do pass on to the kids that I think is really, really good, and one that definitely shaped the course of all of their lives, and personally has shaped the course of mine a lot too, is reading. So on 57, there's a couple different points in this where she talks about it throughout the book. 57 is the first one. It just says, Mom read everything. Charles Dickens, William Faulkner, Henry Miller, Pearl Buck. Dad preferred science and math books, biographies, and history. We kids read whatever Mom brought home from her weekly trips to the library. Brian read thick adventure books. Lori especially loved all the Oz books. And Jeannette likes the Laurel's Engel Wilder stories. And just says, occasionally on those nights when we were all reading together, a train would thunder by, shaking the house and rattling the windows. The noise was thunderous, but after we'd been there a while, we didn't even hear it. They're so engrossed in that reading that they're just really absorbing a lot of that knowledge. And I've found that that's been a super, super helpful habit in my life, in order to just help me be the best version of myself that I can. And you'll see, based off of the career, like Jeannette now is a multiple #1 New York Times best-selling author. Like, I know her reading played a big part of that. And she writes newspaper articles. In high school, she gets a job working at the newspaper. She's like the youngest editor-in-chief at the school newspaper. She takes multiple jobs, writing paper articles, editing them, placing them, like just the habit of reading. And later on, she helps her mom with her work by proofreading the kids' homework. Is just an essential habit that she establishes in being able to build this life, build her life into something that she actually wants later on. So here's another kind of extreme example of what the parents, like a way that the parents take a good principle but just to an absolute extreme that they shouldn't. So they're going to a place called the Hot Pot, which is a natural sulfur spring, just somewhere close to Battle Mountain in Nevada. And it says that Brian and Lori knew how to swim, but Jeannette didn't. And so Dad says, you're going to learn to swim, and she doesn't want to. But he doesn't really take no for an answer. And he just kind of like takes her out to the middle of this sulfur spring. He pries her fingers from around his neck and pushes her away. It says, my arms flailed around and I sank into the hot, smelly water. I instinctively breathed in. Water surged into my nose and mouth and down my throat. My lungs burned. My eyes were open, the sulfur stinging them. But the water was dark and my hair was wrapped around my face and I couldn't see anything. A pair of hands grabbed me around the waist. Dad pulled me into the shallow water. I was spitting and coughing and breathing in uneven, choking gasps. So then she sits there and recovers, and this is where it gets too extreme. Like, I think that happens pretty frequently with kids. But he just picks her up and chucks her back in the middle and says, sink or swim. And she sinks, right? Because there's been no instruction given as to movements to make or how to swim or anything. Dad grabs her again. And he just keeps throwing her into the pool. And so he does it again and again until the realization that he was rescuing me only to throw me back into the water took hold. And so rather than reaching for Dad's hands, I tried to get away from them. I kicked at him and pushed away through the water with my arms, and finally I was able to propel myself beyond his grasp. And then Dad goes, you're doing it, baby, you're swimming. Like, what a terrible, traumatic way to teach your children to swim. Like, what does that teach them? Like, it's pushing your kids away from you, but rather than, like, actually teaching them how. Like, that's just like telling your kids what to do over and over and over again, but never telling them why or never telling them how to do it. Just telling them what and then throwing them in the fire. Telling them what, throwing them in the fire. Like, totally pointless. And it's just not. Just way too extreme. Let's see. So there's another, like, their mom is just, like, honestly kind of a jerk. Like, she is really, really childish, and is just totally selfish, doesn't really do anything for herself and just kind of, doesn't really do anything for anyone else, but just kind of does everything for herself and just exists. She doesn't usually have a job. She just sits at home or paints or reads, and just, that's about it. Like, lays around, paints, reads. She gets a job a couple times through the book. One of the times Jeannette even has to, like, demand and convince her mom to get a job because they're literally starving. That's also a constant theme throughout this book, is that the habits, or the parents have terrible financial habits. They've never actually learned how to hold a budget. And so the kids have to do a lot of it for them. Like, once they're able to, like, in their, before kids should really need to worry about that. Like, they are constantly having to forage for their own food, and budget and hide money from their parents because their parents will just go spend it. Like, just really terrible habits from a financial standpoint that the parents are teaching their kids, and starving is a constant theme throughout this book that really shapes a lot of the way that they live. I just think it's absolutely diabolical probably isn't the right word, but completely irresponsible of parents to teach their kids that those types of bad financial habits. Like, it's on them to go and learn, and teach their kids by that example, and they just don't. It's abysmal. There's this one point where the mom has a teaching degree. Like, she could get a job and get paid good money in just about every town they go to, because they go to a bunch of rinky-dink towns where teachers are constantly in demand. And so she could totally get a job and keep it if she wanted to, but she just doesn't want to. And yeah, anyways. And so there's this one point in time where they're in Battle Mountain, and the teacher's threatening to fire mom from a teaching job that she did get because they had ran out of food again. And it says, so Lori, Brian, and I started helping mom with her schoolwork. I'd go to her classroom after school and clean her chalkboard, dust her erasers, and pick the paper up off the floor. So they're essentially like doing her job for her so that they can get paid as a family and get money to eat food. And then the parents just spend most of the money on stupid stuff that's totally unnecessary and selfish, like drinking, cigarettes, and art supplies. Random garbage crap that you don't need when your kids are starving. And it says, at night, Lori, Brian, and I went over her students' homework and tests. Mom let us grade papers. This says, Jeannette says, I liked grading homework. I liked knowing that I could do what grown-ups did for a living. Like, that's a super key thing to learn at this point. I think she's 6 or 7. Like, to be able to learn that you can do so much more than what probably most of the adults are around you are telling you that you can do or letting you do is a super powerful concept for a kid as young as that to learn. Like, yeah, like you can, like, there's a lot of power behind that. And you can tell in the way that she lives her life that she really takes that responsibility to heart and turns it into a lot of different habits that are very rewarding for her later on down the road. And this is, mom is terrible, right? They're all helping her do her job for her so they can get paid and buy food. And mom, so there's just this one section. Mom marveled at how brilliant Lori was. Lori gets straight A's, she once told me. Jeannette says, so do I. And this is what mom says in response. Just terrible habit to have with your kids is demeaning them. She just says, yes, but you have to work for them. What? No. That's just bad. And there's so many, like, I have so many notes and highlights in here of just terrible situations that they put the kids through. You'll have to buy the book. I can't get through them all. I'll leave a link for it in the show notes, but it's wild. It's wild. There's this one story where there's a kid who's shooting at all of them, including like a little baby, the baby that the mom had, with a BB gun, like through their house. Like, he breaks their house window and is like shooting them with a BB gun. And one of the kids goes up and gets the dad's actual gun, and starts trying to shoot the kid, and he runs away. They don't kill him, but holy cow. Like, talk about not being helpless, and being like resourceful and not just like letting yourself get beat down even in some kind of crazy situations. I'm not recommending shooting anyone. That is not what this is about at all. But being able to take even like crazy, stressful situations that totally just shouldn't be happening at all, and like actually do something about them. Like, you notice that throughout this book, there's a bunch of things that happen where like between flight, fight, and freeze, these kids are constantly choosing fight rather than flight or freeze. And not all the time, but a decent amount of the time they win, and they turn out better because of it. Here's another habit of reading that they get into, or another example of that. Super good. So they're living in Phoenix at this time. Phoenix is growing a lot. Dad's got a job. Mom doesn't have a job. But their the mom's mom had died, so their grandma died, and so they inherited her one of her houses, and that's where they're living. It just says, we rode our bicycles everywhere. Sometimes we attached playing cards to the forks with clothespins, and they flapped around flapped against the spokes when the wheels turned. We pedaled to the Civic Center, which had a library where the librarians recognized us because we went there so much. They helped us find books we thought we'd like, and we filled up the wire baskets on our bicycles and pedaled home right down the middle of the sidewalks as if we owned the place. So this, and you'll see this everywhere, like they're constantly going to the libraries, they're constantly reading everything they can get their hands on. And it's really beneficial for them later on in helping them to develop adult skills that earn them money that help to get them out of the crappy family situation that they're in. Here's another example of like a good principle in theory that the parents are trying to teach the kids, but they go way too extreme with. Just says, mom and dad like to make a big point about never surrendering to fear or to prejudice or to the narrow-minded conformist sticks in the mud who tried to tell everyone else what was proper. We were supposed to ignore those benighted sheep, as dad called them. And that's good. Like, I think that's good. Like, being a nonconformist, like all of the high performers that I've studied so far, to some degree or another, were oddballs or misfits or nonconformists. You study that throughout history, that trait of nonconformity, that habit of making a habit of being different from people is constantly abounding in characters throughout history who actually did something with their lives. Like, that's just a given. So the principle is good, but mom takes it way too far. And one day they're at the library. They're in Phoenix, right, in the summer, so it's super hot. And mom suggests that they cool off by jumping into the fountain in front of the building. The water was too shallow to swim in, but we paddled around pretending to be crocodiles. People are telling them that they can't swim. And mom said, mind your own beeswax, to the people telling them that swimming was forbidden in the fountain. Jeannette starts feeling kind of embarrassed and starts to climb out, and mom says, ignore the fuddy-duddies, and clambers into the fountain with her kids, plops down and gets down into the fountain with them. Like, good, but also too much. We see that again just later on down that page. They're going to church, and again, another good principle, right? Mom thought it was superficial to worry about how you looked. She said God thought the same way. And so that's good. Like, that's great. It says it was your inner spirit and not your outward appearance that matters. That's true, right? But this is what she does, is she'd go to church in torn or paint splattered clothes. And then just like belt the hymns out, right? So it's like, yes, it's true that it's superficial in the way you look. Like, God doesn't really care about that. And that it's your inner spirit and not your outward appearance that mattered. But she was taking it so far to an extreme that it was hypocritical, right? Because she's saying, oh, look at how much my appearance doesn't matter. And in doing that, she's attracting attention, which is her point the entire time. right? So it's just pretty hypocritical. Bad habit, bad standard to set for your kids, but good principle in theory. At the point in Phoenix is when Dad really starts getting to be more and more of a drunk. He's been a drunk the whole time, but it's so bad that on her birthday, Jeannette has to ask her dad. Like, her dad's like, I'll give you anything you want. Like, you just name it, and like, I'll give it to you, and it's yours, and whatever. And she asks her dad to stop drinking, because that's how bad it is at that point. Yeah, and he does, and his example of that is really, like, powerful. Like, he chains himself to a bed, and doesn't get out or anything, but then he just goes back to it after like a summer, which is a terrible example of integrity, to say that you're going to do something and then not, when it's something that someone you love asks you to do. Insincerity is just a terrible habit to have when you tell people, especially someone that you love and care about, like your child or your significant other. You tell them that you're going to do something, and then you do it for a little bit, and then you don't. Like, bad habit. And it reminds me of one of the philosophies that Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett have in the way that they run their business, is that they don't try to like be brilliant or make brilliant moves all the time. They just try to not do stupid stuff. They know that, and I know, like, there's always going to be someone out there smarter than me. There's always going to be someone out there more dedicated. But if I can just consistently not do stupid stuff and mitigate my risk, I'm going to win over the long term if I can do that for a long period of time. And you can tell, like, the parents don't do that. They just are constantly doing stuff that it's just like, dude, this literally doesn't make any sense. Logically, common sense, like, there's none of that applied. And the kids learn from those bad habits, luckily, and flip them on their head and really change the script for the family. At this point, they move again to Welch in West Virginia, and this is the last place that they lived before things really start shifting around. They move from there. Lori gets out first and goes to New York City. Then Jeannette follows her, then Brian, and then Maureen. And they get out and start making more money. They get away from their parents and have like a lot more control over that and really start to make things happen. There's a couple examples of resourcefulness that Jeannette makes a habit of that I want to point out. One of them, she gets a job working at a jewelry store. The job is for... Oh, actually, no, I can't skip this one to go to that first. This is so good. So she's 13 years old at this point, and something that's just absolutely wild. She notices, and her family says, like, oh, like, her teeth are sticking out, right? And she's like, okay, well, what can I do about this? And the answer is, like, get braces, right, to help fix her teeth. And she's talking and trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I get braces? How much do they cost? All this kind of thing. She asked one of her friends at school, and back then it was their $1,200, which is way more. She did the calculations. She said, I was getting $1 an hour to babysit. I usually worked 5 or 6 hours a week because she's in school at this time, which meant that if I saved every penny I earned, it would take about 4 years to raise the money. And then this is wild, like the resourcefulness needed for this. She says, I decided to make my own braces. Like, what? Absolutely wild. And then she does. And so she goes, it says, I went to the library and asked for a book on orthodontia. The librarian looked at me kind of funny and said she didn't have one, so I realized I'd have to figure things out as I went along. The process involved some experimentation and several false starts. If that's not a recipe for how to win at life, I don't know what is. Like, you see something that is totally out of your reach, and you say, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. You don't know how to do it, but you're just going to, like, you just make up your mind to do it. And then you do. And then she goes and, like, researches and figures it out and starts messing around. And by messing around, I mean experimenting. And it works. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just read it to you. So it says, at first I simply used a rubber band. Before going to bed, I would stretch it all the way around the entire set of my upper teeth. The rubber band was small but thick and had a good tight fit. But it pressed down uncomfortably on my tongue, and sometimes it would pop off during the night and I'd wake up choking on it. Usually, however, it stayed on all night, and in the morning my gums would be sore from the pressure on my teeth. And so she makes a couple modifications over time. She bends a metal coat. It says, I bent a metal coat hanger into a horseshoe shape to fit the back of my head. Then I curled the two ends outward, so when the coat hanger was around my head, the ends angled away from my face and formed hooks to hold the rubber band in place. When I tried it on, the coat hanger dug into the back of my skull, so I used a Kotex sanitary napkin for padding. Like, the ingenuity and creativity of this, she's like 13 at this time. A 13-year-old girl going out making her own braces. Like, absolutely incredible. And there's one night her dad comes in drunk, and he's like, dude, what is this on your head? And she takes it off and shows him, explains it to him, and he just says, put them back on. And he says, those braces are a gosh dang feat of engineering genius. And I think that they're working. So, like, she makes her own braces and they work. Like, the resourcefulness is off the charts. There's another example of this. I think this one is really applicable to like some social habits that we can make today. She's like, her and her whole family, like, her dad's the town drunk. Her mom doesn't really do anything and is just an oddball. They're dirt poor. All of their clothes are ratty. They're skinny, they're scrawny, they're constantly having to, like, forage for food. They don't have any lunches that they usually bring to school because of how poor they are. And, like, everyone knows. And when you're, like, maybe it's changed since I graduated, but, like, when you were in school, like, that being poor is definitely a target for bullying, unfortunately. And so she gets bullied throughout this book. That's a pretty constant theme, and doesn't really have any friends. And so she decides to do something about it, and puts her resourcefulness to work here. It just says, that year I started working for the school newspaper, the Maroon Wave. I wanted to join some club or group or organization where I could feel I belonged, where people wouldn't move away if I sat down next to them. So she wanted to go have friends. She wanted to find a place where she belonged. And then she just was like, okay, well, I can't do track because I can't afford it. I can't join band because we can't buy a musical instrument. But here's this option for the school newspaper that you don't have to buy a uniform or a musical instrument or pay any dues to work on. But it's a place where I can belong, so I'm going to go do that. And that ends up being one of the best choices for her that she could have made, because it's where she finds something that she really loves, doing that. And it, like, just that habit of resilient resourcefulness and just relentless resourcefulness to make the life that she wants, regardless of the circumstances around her, really starts to help her to take off here. It says, the years I'd spent helping mom check spelling on her students' homework had given me lots of practice for this line of work. She's studying the articles that other students had written for typos, making corrections to them, and then like running the corrected lines, fixing the newspaper, all that type of thing. And it's absolutely incredible. She ends up deciding that she really, really likes journalism and that she wants to be one of the people who knew what was really going on in the world. And that resourcefulness put her in that environment in the first place, just because she wanted to find a place where she felt like she belonged. And then ultimately she finds her career from it, which I think is super cool. Just a few more examples here. So they end up working to save money. The kids, they hatch their own plan. This is a little bit later when they're in high school. I think Lori is a junior and Jeanette's a sophomore, and I think Brian's in 7th or 8th grade at this point. Maureen is a little bit younger, and she's not like as much in this picture because there's a bit of a gap as far as the plan goes. But they hatched this plan to get Lori to New York, so that she can like be out of the house, start making her own money, start saving it, start managing right, and not have the chance of just like create a better life for herself. And it's super cool. There's this portion of where their resourcefulness and their creativity really comes into play with that. So Lori makes really good posters for football rallies, for the plays the drama club put on, and for candidates running for student council. Now she started doing commissioned posters for $1.50 a piece. And it talks about how she does really good work, like high quality. She's a really good artist. And that everyone started buying her posters around the school. It says the posters were so good that word of mouth spread, and soon Lori had such a backlog of orders that she was up working until 1 or 2 every morning making these posters. And then Jeannette is making money babysitting and then doing other kids' homework. And talk about like maintaining a good relationship and like being able to be resourceful and getting return clients. She says, I charged $1 per assignment and guaranteed at least an A- or the customer was entitled to a full refund. I think that's a good deal. That's a good deal. And obviously this is like a long time ago, as far as like $1 per hour or whatever, but or per assignment, but it goes a long way back in their day. And it also says this is like these kids are really, really responsible amongst themselves and in helping the family survive. And Brian, who wasn't even originally included in the plans to get out of Welch and go to New York City and build their own life, still pitches in once he learns about the escape fund. And he'd mow lawns, chop wood, cut hillside weeds. It says, like, these kids know how to work. They've got a really good work ethic habit going on here. It says, He mowed lawns or chopped wood or cut hillside weeds with a scythe. He worked after school until the sun went down and all day Saturday and Sunday, and came home with his arms and face scratched from the brush he'd cleared. Without looking for thanks or praise, he quietly added his earnings to the pig, which we named Oz. Dude's in 7th grade. Like, what? Going home from school and working until the sun went down every day, or working 7 days a week, all day Saturday and Sunday. And that's not just him. That's like all of these kids, besides Maureen, are doing that. And it's just really incredible, like the work ethic that they have. And unfortunately, it's a work ethic that they're learning for themselves, because their parents have the opposite effect. I think that's kind of the key here, is that there's a lot of habits from the parents that are bad, and that won't always be the case in studying these high performers. But it's kind of like their bad habits, they were able to learn from the bad, and by learning from the bad, they were able to implement the good. So they didn't necessarily copy what was good from their parents, because there really wasn't a lot of good to go around. But they kind of used the inverse of that and flipped the bad and turned it into the good. Like they learn how to budget when they're in high school, like at a young age. They even offer to budget for their mom, and their mom kind of blows them off and is like, "Oh, you can't do that." Yeah, it's pretty bad. And so eventually, they make it to New York City. Lori goes 1 year, and then the next year Jeannette goes. They're working. Jeannette is just working like a dog. And eventually she gets a job at a newspaper again, which she loves. She starts working 90-hour weeks, making $125 a week, and is just really excited about the chance to be independent, do things on her own, and just have that control and that safety and security in working hard, and being able to be responsible and have that responsibility pay off when done consistently over time, and just frankly not doing stupid stuff. She's not brilliant. She's not a genius, right? Like her mom so rudely pointed out. But she's making things happen because she's consistently applying effort over time. And that continues to have an effect for the rest of her life. I think she lives in the countryside of New York. But like I want to, this is one of the last things that we'll read, but I want to read you this, and just to show like how much this work ethic pays off, this habit of hard work and discipline, and just really grinding to make the life that you want happen. And so her boss at the newspaper that she was at convinces her to go to college when she's in New York, so that she can get a better job. And so it just says, so she applies to Bernard, which is the sister college to Columbia University, and works to be able to cover that tuition. She gets a lot of grants and loans and everything. But this is the schedule. Like, this was absolutely mind-boggling for me, because I went to college and I took a decent amount of classes and worked pretty hard, I thought, but she just puts me totally to shame, and probably a lot of other people here, and just how serious she is about getting stuff done. Says, and just like with how resourceful she is in making things happen the way that she needs them to. So it says, once school started, I could no longer pay my share of the rent, but a psychologist let me have a room in her Upper West Side apartment in exchange for looking after her 2 small sons. I found a weekend job in an art gallery, crowded all my classes into 2 days. This is an Ivy League school, not easy, and became the news editor of the Bernard Bulletin. So she's at an Ivy League school. She gets a weekend job. She becomes a news editor. She puts all of her classes into 2 days for a full course load. And she says, but I gave up the news editor job when I was hired as an editorial assistant 3 days a week at one of the biggest magazines in the city. Writers there had published books and covered wars and interviewed presidents. I got to forward their mail, check their expense accounts, and do word counts on their manuscripts. I felt I'd arrived. And more or less, they had. So at this point, Brian has moved to New York too. They're all working hard. Maureen comes to New York. Mom and Dad stay in Welch for a little bit. And Brian's got his own place. And it just, like, think about how rewarding this would be to go have such a crazy, unstable, wild childhood. And then to, like, picture this scene, like, the reward is worth the consistency and worth the effort. So all 4 kids are now in New York City. Maureen's in a good school, a good public school in Manhattan. And just says, on weekends, we all met at Lori's apartment. We made fried pork chops or heaping plates of spaghetti and meatballs and sat around talking about Welch, laughing so hard at the idea of all that craziness that our eyes watered. Like, they did it. They did it. They were able to win. And so this book ends with a Thanksgiving dinner 5 years after the dad dies. The parents actually moved to New York. And that's where that scene that we read, the quote from the beginning, happens. Is the parents move to New York and dad scrounges up that money playing poker while they're still homeless. And so 5 years after their dad dies, Maureen actually kind of has a meltdown, moves out to California. And Jeannette, like, has made it at this point. She has worked her way up for a newspaper company, editorial company, and now, like, has gotten to the point where she's got a really nice cottage home out in, I'm assuming, upstate New York, somewhere in that area. Has, like, a garden, has a pool, has a nice house, lots of space, nice husband that she really loves, treats her nice, not like dad was treating mom, right? And they have this Thanksgiving dinner with just about all the family except Maureen, and they just kind of, like, spend a little bit of time looking back on their life and recognizing how far they were able to come because of the good habits that they were able to keep to, and the fact that they learned from the bad habits of their parents and incorporating those good habits. So Jeannette now obviously is a best-selling author, and has plenty of money, I'm sure, especially because she was working a ton even before she became a best-selling author. It says in the back cover that she's a regular contributor to MSNBC.com. The Glass Castle won the 2005 Elle Readers Prize and 2006 American Library Association Alex Award. I'm going to be honest, I don't know how important those awards are, but the fact that her books are winning awards is pretty impressive in and of itself, especially considering how many books are out there. Brian becomes a decorated sergeant detective, supervising a special unit investigating organized crime, is flipping houses and making that work. And Lori's working as a freelance artist and making good money, like designing and illustrating different objects for people. And so I just want to end with this quote, like, they made it. They took an absolutely wild life, implemented good habits based off of the bad ones, and turned their lives into something absolutely incredible now at this point. And there's a lot that we can learn from their resourcefulness, their resilience, the responsibility that they take to control their lives, regardless of the circumstances that they're in. And so we'll just end with this. It just says, the kitchen was filled with the smell of roasting turkey. John had prepared with a stuffing of sausage. John's her husband, Jeanette's husband. Stuffing of sausage, mushroom, walnuts, apples, and spiced breadcrumbs. He'd also made creamed onions, wild rice, cranberry sauce, and squash casserole. I'd baked 3 pies with apples from a nearby orchard. And here's the point here. Bonanza, Brian shouted. Feast time, I said to him. He looked at the dishes. I knew what he was thinking, what he thought every time he saw a spread like this one. He shook his head and said, it's really not that hard to put food on the table if that's what you decide to do. And that's where I'll end it. There's a lot of encouragement in that book to just like act and take control of the situation, and just kind of have a habit of being predisposed to action. One of my favorite quotes is from John D Rockefeller, where he just says, action solves everything, right? And note, there's not a time frame on that action when it is solving your problems, but just like the fact that you are acting consistently over time to make something better than what you currently have will eventually solve your problems. Eventually. There's not a time frame on eventually. So if you like this episode, you want to buy the book, which I highly recommend. It's a pretty short read. I read it. I was kind of obsessed with this book, so I read it in like 24 hours or so. It's not even 300 pages, so really good weekend read or something. Highly recommend. I'll drop a link to it in the show notes of the podcast player. So if you want to support the podcast and buy the book at the same time at no additional cost to you, you can totally do that. And then I will drop a link to the Accountability Lab as well, which is the online community where I teach people how to set habits that actually stick and then keep them accountable to them. So if either of those are interesting to you, the link is in the show notes, and we'll see you next week. Keep the change and keep changing.